Left flank. Union left flank. If you think we're going to talk about the Battle of Gettysburg and Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and the 20th Maine, prepare to be disappointed. But I am going to take you on a historical journey to another Union left flank. The left flank anchored on the Valley Pike during the Battle of Newmarket, which happened on May 15th, 1864. It might not have been as triumphant a moment as occurred on other Union left flanks, but what happened during the Battle of Newmarket in this area on this portion of the Union line is incredibly important to understand. And today we're going to talk about Stahl's Cavalry Charge, the charge of the 54th Pennsylvania, and what the Confederates were doing in that region as well. I'm Sarah K. Byerly with Gazette 66.5, and I invite you to join me for a discussion of the Union left flank of the Bouchon lines during the Battle of Newmarket. Now, if you've just stumbled across this video, I would encourage you to go back and watch some of the previous videos that we've done in this series. You'll find them on the playlist Battle of Newmarket on Gazette 66.5's YouTube channel. Particularly if you're not familiar with the way the Bouchon lines are set up during the Battle of Newmarket. This is the third defensive position for the Union Army. Go back and watch the video that we did last week. It's all about the troop positions, and that'll be really important. So take a refresher course there if you need to, because we are going to dive right in, or maybe I should say gallop right in, to the history that happened on the Union left flank. Now, as I've mentioned before, the Battle of Newmarket happens very fluidly. And what I mean by that is we can block out on a map where we think units were at certain periods of time, and we can make pretty good guesses on the battle timeline. But overall, this is a fight that moves. They do not go to that little position on the map and stay stuck there, generally speaking, for a long period of time. This has been a moving fight up to the time that the Union and Confederate armies hit their Bouchon lines. The Bouchon lines will actually be the position that they'll hang on to for quite a while in the afternoon of May 15th. And we're going to focus our discussion today on what was happening on the Union's left flank, which would also be the Confederates' right. You just have to figure out which side of the field you're standing on. But just keep in mind, as we talk about the things that were happening here, there was skirmishing, there was fighting going on the other portions of the line. And we'll cover that in another video in the upcoming weeks. Now, first off, you have to meet Major General Julius Stahl. He was a Hungarian immigrant. He had gone to a military academy in the Old World in Europe, and he's immigrated to America. He takes part in the Civil War, and he's an ardent Unionist, and he shows up at some really unique locations in his Civil War saga. For example, he's one of the military officers who was present when Abraham Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address. Well, Julius Stahl was probably better as a staff officer, and maybe even better as a politician if he had gone that route. But his cavalry ideas left a little bit to be desired. And unfortunately for the Union cavalry at the Battle of Newmarket, that becomes very evident in what happens in the mid-afternoon of May 15th. So the Union has established their lines, the Bouchon lines. They have their cavalry on the left flank. That's an appropriate area to place your cavalry. And the Stahl has been gathering cavalry units, drawing them from other commanders and bringing them under his immediate command. And he thinks he has a really brilliant idea. He takes these units, he brings them together, and he decides to charge them up the Valley Pike. They're going to charge south along this important roadway that leads through the Shenandoah Valley and toward the town of Newmarket. Now, all of his horsemen are not going to be able to fit on the relatively narrow valley pike, so they're spilling out onto either side of this roadway. But his idea is to send a smashing cavalry charge up the valley pike to hit the Confederate lines. He thinks the Confederates are not well organized in their advance. And would it have worked? Maybe. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but let's talk about what actually happened. Behind me is Route 11, which in 1864 was the Valley Turnpike. At about 2:45, by best estimated guesses, on May 15, 1864, the Union cavalry commanded by General Julius Stall decides to make a charge down the Valley Turnpike. They're hoping to turn in and attack the Confederate right flank. Seems like a good idea, except the ground's really muddy and the Confederates had artillery set up on the ridge line far behind me. If you can see the buildings far out there, that's about where the Confederates had their guns. Unfortunately for the Union, their cavalry charge does not work. The artillery decimates the cavalry and the muddy ground doesn't help. This further adds complications, challenges, and a lot of casualties out here on the east side. Breckinridge places quite a bit of his artillery at the point of a V, and then he has his infantry regiments form the sides of that V. His artillery is posted on a ridge. It's a good position, and it commands this entire area that Stall is running his cavalry into. So Stall and his men set off on this grand, glorious cavalry charge, which is ingloriously stopped by mud and Confederate artillery. Why mud? Well, it had been raining a lot prior to and during the Battle of Newmarket, and the area along the Valley Pike that Stall makes this cavalry charge, it starts on a higher piece of ground, and then it slopes downward through what we call the little ravine in Strayer's pasture, and then it rises up again to the ridge line where Breckinridge had his artillery. In that little low rise, it was definitely muddy, if not a small stream running through there at the time. So this is not a good situation for horsemen. Their horses are getting bogged down in the mud, and then they are just getting decimated by artillery fire, and then of course the Confederate infantry that is moving into position. So all of this brings the big question, why did Stall do it? Clearly his cavalry charge fails. Breckinridge has his men, has his artillery into position. What possessed Julius Stall to take these horsemen and run them into a literal valley of death? Well, I have a couple of ideas. First off, it could have been some of the European training that he had coming from this military academy in the Old World. And think about it, we know that at the United States military academies, they were still looking back to Napoleonic era tactics and holding Napoleon and his generals up as these men who were masters of tactics, who won so many battlefield victories. If Stall is thinking along those lines, then he actually executes a very classic Napoleonic cavalry charge maneuver. He sees the possibility that his enemy, being the Confederates, might be advancing in disarray. He thinks this might be an opportunity to take advantage of that, possibly even hit the Confederate flank. So he masses his cavalry, makes a charge. It has the hallmarks of a Napoleonic era move. So there's a possibility there. There's another possibility that Stall did not realize Breckinridge was bringing cannons in. Now, if you go to Newmarket Battlefield and you go and stand where the Union cavalry massed, or you stand at the Confederate artillery position, you will think, how could Stall not have seen? I mean, you can see with the naked eye to point A, point B. It's clear. He should have been able to see cannons coming in, especially if he's using his field glasses. So was he blind? No, he wasn't blind, but there is a high possibility that the rain and the storm that's occurring at Newmarket could have been impeding his vision. We know that it rained heavily, and the battle smoke was hanging fog-like on Newmarket battlefield during the afternoon fight. So is it possible that Stahl has massed his artillery but does not see, does not hear, does not realize that Breckinridge has brought cannons in? It's possible. Breckinridge gets those guns into position very quickly. The best that I've been able to figure out, those cannoneers fire their first shots from that position into the cavalry charge. So it's not like they would have been having an artillery duel from that position prior to this charge. I spent a lot of time sitting at a desk in California trying to figure out how Julius Stahl could make such a mistake. And then when I got out to the battlefield on a stormy day, I started to have to rethink my ideas. So this is just some thoughts for me on what possibly could have been going on for Stahl and this decision that he makes. It was last year, August 2018, and I was in Newmarket. I was there late in an evening, and the main area of the battlefield wasn't open, but I had decided I wanted to go out to the east side of the battlefield and stop at the Pennsylvania Monument. So I'd had dinner in town, drove down the Valley Pike a little ways, and there was definitely a storm coming in. I could see that as I was heading out of town, and it's not real far from town to the Confederate artillery position and then to where the Union lines were. And by the time I neared the position of the Union lines, it was torrential pouring rain. It was to such an extent that I was concerned there was going to be a flooded river in the lowland where the cavalry charged. Excuse me, even though we have good modern roads there now. So I actually pulled over at an area just to get off the road because there was so much water on the road that I was a bit nervous driving in it, and I've driven through some pretty big storms in Virginia, but this one was big. So I just pulled off and was waiting there. Well, the rain eased up a little bit, and I decided to get off this area I'd pulled over because I didn't want to sink my car into the mud. So I got back on the road and was able to get turned around and back to the Pennsylvania Monument. It was still pouring rain, and I thought, how neat is this? This is a cool experience. I don't know if I'll ever have this chance again. I can see Newmarket battlefield, or a portion of it, in a rainstorm, and we know that it was pouring rain at some point when the guys were out here on the Bouchon lines. So I climbed out of the car, and I didn't take an umbrella because it was raining and it was a bit windy, and I didn't think an umbrella would do me any good, and this was my last stop anyway before heading to my lodgings for the evening. When I stepped out of my car, I was soaked within seconds. It was just a wonderful summer rainstorm, but it was really, really pouring. So I walked toward the Pennsylvania Monument, and I start looking to where the ridge should have been, where the Confederate artillery posted. I could barely see it, and there was no battle smoke on the field, just torrential rain. So that made me start to reconsider my criticisms of Julius Stahl. Did he make mistakes? Yes. He should have figured out if there were any dangers before running his entire cavalry into that area. But if he was wanting to quickly exploit what he thought might have been confusion, and he honestly could not see because of the battle smoke and the rainstorm, in some ways, that does change our understanding of the battle and our understanding of Stahl's cavalry charge and that narrative. Now, moving on, there is a unit that I particularly want to talk about that's out in this area, and I kind of mentioned them already because they have a monument out on the field there, and that is the 54th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment. And they are going to be the infantry, the foot soldier unit that anchors Sigel's Bouchon line to the Valley Pike. Now, the 54th Pennsylvania had not engaged earlier in the fight, so their first engagement is going to be here on the Bouchon lines, and they will position on the north side of Strayer's pasture. We're standing here at the monument for the 54th Pennsylvania Infantry on Newmarket battlefield. And I thought I would read a little bit from the official records that tells you part of this regiment's role in the Battle of Newmarket. It says, we remained in this position, which would be very close to where we are right now, partly shielded from fire by the enemy by the crest of a hill in front, until, observing the regiment on my right making a charge in the absence of orders, I presumed it proper to imitate their example. I ordered the 54th also to charge, which was done with alacrity and spirit. The entire regiment goes charging into Strayer's pasture. It's a scene that maybe would be great for a painting. I don't know, maybe someday some military painter will attempt to take it on. But they go charging into this pasture thinking that they'll be able to push the assembled Confederate regiments that they're facing out of the area. Doesn't work so well because the Confederates are waiting, and the Confederates have hidden themselves in one of the small rises or depressions. They're using a rise, they're hiding in the depression to shelter themselves, and as the 54th Pennsylvanians, they're coming through the ravine and they hit this area where the Confederates are hiding, the Confederates rise up and just pour a decimating rifle volley into the unit. The regiment will exchange shots in the field, but unsupported. Remember, one unit has made this attack. They're going to be forced to fall back. This happens over a period of time, of course. Took longer to happen than it did for me to describe. But the 54th Pennsylvania also starts to have a problem because the Confederate infantry units that had been around the artillery earlier during the cavalry charge, they start coming in on the Pennsylvania's flank or on their side. And if infantry, basically if any military unit gets on another's flank, you're able to send devastating fire into that unit that is under attack. So the 54th Pennsylvania is in grave danger of being outflanked, and through a series of maneuvers, flanking maneuvers, down there, the Confederates are able to push the 54th Pennsylvania boys back and eventually get that regiment to break as the rest of the lines are retreating. And now that happened, and a lot of other things were happening on the Union lines as well. The 54th Pennsylvania veterans were very much defined by what happened at Newmarket. Their charge, what happened in that fight, made a big impression on them. And in the years after the war, many of those veterans came back to the field at Newmarket, this pasture land that had been where they fought, and so many of their comrades had died or were left wounded. And they came back to remember. They also came back to erect a monument, a memorial there. And it is my understanding that it is the only Pennsylvania dedicated monument within the state of Virginia. So it's a bit unique that way. You can see it. You access it from Route 11, which is the Old Valley Pike. It's easiest to stop there if you are traveling south on the Valley Pike. If you're traveling north, the best thing to do is find a safe place to get turned around so that you're heading south again so you can use the pull-off safely. So keep that in mind if you're out there wanting to stop at the monument. But it is there. Veterans of the unit did come back for that monument dedication. It was really a time when they met with former enemies, they met with civilians of the area, they talked about the battle, they helped to solidify its memory. And by placing this monument, they helped to ensure that Union stories of Newmarket would not be forgotten, especially on the left flank. So what is the significance of the story of the Union left flank at the Battle of Newmarket? Well, I think it serves to represent that there were a lot of things that happened on the Newmarket battlefield that were not at all connected to the history of the Virginia Military Institute cadets. Now, those cadets claim a lot of spotlight when it comes to Newmarket's history. And rightfully so. We're going to give them a whole video segment to themselves in a couple of weeks to talk about the importance of what they accomplished. But there's more to the Newmarket story than just the cadets. And on the left flank, we see some important things playing out. We see that the Union may be in their third defensive position, but they are not standing passively by. Stall made a mistake by running his cavalry into an unseen area. but he's also making an attempt. He may be thinking that he can take advantage of Confederate chaos. Unfortunately for him, of course, the Confederates have some cannons. The 54th Pennsylvania, they are also ready, they are willing to fight. They will make a historic charge into open pasture land that is crisscrossed by ravines, by hollows. They think they might have a chance at the Confederate lines. Unfortunately, they're going to end up in trouble also, and then eventually be outflanked by the Confederate units on that side, which will maneuver against them. So what we see is a battle within a battle. It can be good and bad to divide a battle like this and look specifically at lines. What I really want to emphasize is what was happening on the Union left flank, the Confederate right flank. That's just part of the fight. So in my opinion, what happens on the east side of New Market Battlefield, the east side of the Bashong lines, it just serves as a smaller picture of what was happening as a whole on the Union lines. The Union makes a decisive stand, but then due to Confederate maneuvering and persistent Confederate attacks, they're going to be weakened and forced out of that position as the afternoon wears on. And that's where we have to stop, because otherwise this video is just going to get longer and longer and longer. But come back next week, because we're going to talk about what was happening further west on the Union and Confederate lines. The attempts that were made on the Union right flank by the Confederates on the Confederate left flank, because there's some really exciting things happening there. And then, of course, at the center of it all, Cadet Corps from Virginia Military Institute. So we've got lots more history coming on the Battle of New Market. Come join us next week for another segment. That's going to be all for today, and I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion of yet another Union left flank on an important Civil War battlefield. I'm Sarah K. Byerly with Gazette 66.5. Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful and inspired week. Thank you. Bye-bye.